Hey y'all, welcome to today's video. This video is going to be on RBAC and the principle of least privilege. I haven't decided what I'm actually going to name it yet, or I would say it now, but you'll have to trust that I'll come up with a good one. In this case, we're going to cover how we authenticate to the cluster. And if you have completed the deployment demo video that I did, Zero to DevOps, we're going to use that as a baseline. In that project, we deploy out to a cluster. We're doing Helm upgrade and we're using Helm charts to interact with the cluster through CI/CD, but we're doing that with a full admin programmatic key in order to authenticate to Linode. So I want to go over a few other ways that we might be able to approach this and how we can prove that we are who we say we are. We're going to briefly touch on restricting permissions with the API keys that we have inside of Linode. And then we're going to spend the majority of the time on creating a service account that can take action on our cluster, upgrade our Helm charts, and then get that into our CI/CD. Really, we want to make sure we're implementing the principle of least privilege, at least in some capacity, not to give everybody super admin rights, just implementing good DevOps practices. Thanks for joining me. So let's start by talking about how we set it up originally. I have the config file for the deployment demo here, and this is going to be how we're talking to the cluster. So you see we're getting the kubeconfig from Linode through this call, and this is using the Linode token. Now, the Linode token that we set up was a super admin token, so it has access to everything. We can jump into Linode and see what that would look like. So that would be here. You can see you can do select all and do read and write. Now, obviously, for the principle of least privilege, we're not going to want to do this for everything. So one way to go about it would be if you just need access to Kubernetes with a token, you can actually just add that token in, access Kubernetes, and that's it. So that is a way to restrict the token and restrict what it can do, so that if you had a malicious actor who wanted to use this token and to run those things, all they would be able to access would be the cluster. Let's start by going to the Kubernetes documentation and just talking about service accounts. So you can see here, a service account provides an identity for a process that runs in a pod. A service account is just something that does something for you. You're going to lock down its permissions. It's going to have one task instead of full admin access that you already have. Really good documentation. This is configuring service accounts for pods. There's also a good one on managing service accounts or using multiple service accounts. I'll make sure I include those links in the description. What I want to do is actually go through a tutorial just to cover some of the core concepts here. So I have a fresh cluster up and ready to go. Alias, I'll just show you that it's great. So you have one secret there, a service account token in a fresh cluster. Again, you can see to that 10 minutes old. We're going to run through some of this. We're going to start by just creating the service account. This one is called kubeconfig SA, so kubeconfig service account. So I'm going to copy, paste it. It's going to put it in the kube system namespace. Great, and that is created. That's step one. If we want to get in and actually see what the file that was applied looks like, we can do that with a command like this. Git service accounts. It's going to be config SA -o YAML is going to give us the YAML file. There we are. Sorry, I forgot the namespace there. And this is what it looks like when you create it like that. You're going to see the creation timestamp. It's going to be one of the unique things, but also just the namespace that's in. The name of it, the metadata is pretty simple there, but it's a good, easy way to get it. So we're going to move along. Now we're going to create a cluster role binding. So this is a cluster administration permissions. We're going to bind it to that service account. So it's going to be a cluster admin. This account's going to be able to do that. So let's see. kubectl create cluster role binding, add on cluster admin, so cluster administration permissions. Cluster role is cluster admin -- service account. So it's kube system is the namespace, and then it's specifically kubeconfig service account. Great, and this is a good example. So this is written before, I'm on Kubernetes version 1.22, and this V1 beta, that was deprecated after 1.21. So there are times where you might be following a tutorial where you might have to think a little bit outside the box. So you could either, approach this a couple ways. You can go and figure out ways to go to the deprecation guides. And so down in this deprecated API migration guide, we can see that this is what should be used, and this has been deprecated. So it's out of beta. That's actually really cool to see. But we're going to want to go ahead and find a way to do this. So how I did it was I went and found a good example through blogs, but you can also use the YAML of one from a previous version, similar to what we just did with that getting the cluster role binding -o YAML, and then customize it. Just take out that beta, look for examples there through the the API and documentation. So a good example of something didn't work in a tutorial, but you can absolutely make it work with a small tweak. So I have an example up here that I'm going to pull in, and I will include this in the repository. So let's do touch. So you're going to see the API version without the beta. The kind is cluster role binding. Metadata, I'm calling it cluster admin CI. Role ref, so this is a cluster role. It's going to be cluster admin. Really what you just saw through that CLI command over here. You're going to see a lot of that over here. So you're adding on the cluster admin. Cluster role is cluster admin, and you're defining the service account. So you see the service account here. It is kubectl service account, and namespace is going to be default. So go ahead and save this. GTL apply file cluster role binding YAML. Wonderful. And this cluster role binding RBAC authorization has been created. So we're going to move on here. You can see that this also was created there. I did change the name, I guess is a good note. Add-on cluster admin is what it was called previously, and then I named it cluster admin CI. All right, then we're going to get the service account authentication token. A couple things here that are going to be really useful down the road. So it's going to be the token, and then the CA cert is going to be available. So let's do this. Copy, and let's see what's going on with this. So I have the token name there. So you see I'm getting the service account, and then with the kubectl SA, and then I'm getting the secrets name. So let's actually go back to that, getting the service account, and we're going to use a few things there. Let's go back to this command. Get the YAML of it. Of course, I call it something different. Kubectl and the namespace. So you're going to note the secret name here. It is kubectl service account token, and then there's a random string there. Let me go ZTL get secret, name of secret, and the namespace. Okay, so I have the secret name there. Now I'm going to put this as YAML. Let's actually do that as YAML too. Cool. So we see a couple things here that we're going to want to take note of. The CA cert is going to be one of those that we're going to use. I'm going to have this deleted after. You probably shouldn't share this or link your credentials. I would definitely, when we're talking about RBAC here, this would really be a bad practice. And then the token. So these are the two things that you're going to want to use for authentication when we get out to the cluster, the actual cluster. This is what the rest of the the secret does look like. So there are going to be a lot of things and a lot of fields here. Don't worry about most of them. Those two are definitely the important ones. And these are the things that we're going to be interacting with also when we run these commands. So you can see that command was kubectl get secret, and then there's the secret name, the kube system. See down here, we're going to do some similar things. So we have the token name and then the token, keep system, get secret token name, and then JSON path. So what that does there is just instead of printing out the full YAML, it goes to the data section and gets the actual token. And then it's going to base 64 decode it. Let's see what happens here. Great. And then what is base 64? That's another thing that we're going to see throughout this. There's some documentation on base 64, but really that's the core of what you need to know. Base 64 is a way to send information, so encode, decode text to be used. It's not for encryption. Its real benefit is transmitting the data without losing or changing the actual content. Here's the Mozilla developer website for base 64. There's also a good Wikipedia article if you want to learn some more, but just know that it's a way to send text. And what this is doing is getting that token, and then it's base 64 decoding it. So that can be sent somewhere. That's what we're doing with it. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to add the service account and its auth token as a new user definition in the kubeconfig file. That's going to be a good one. And then service account name. So actually, let's go to the actual command because we have all of these set. User kubeconfig service account is set. And then we're going to set the current context. So we're going to make sure we're taking these actions now as the service account and not as this super admin that I am right now. So let's run this. Context Docker desktop, that's what I'm using, has been modified. So now I'm this user. And then if I want to actually go and see the users, I have a command I can do to go ahead and get those. It's going to be kubectl config view -o, and then instead of YAML, we're using JSON path this time. So users and then name. So you can see these are the two users that I have: kubeconfig service account and then Docker desktop, and that's super admin there. So now that it is completely done on this local cluster. I'm up, I have a service account, context is modified. I'm taking actions as this service account user whose permissions I control. Pretty cool. So now that we've done it locally, I'm going to go ahead and nuke this thing, and then let's get out to the real cluster. Quick addendum on how to switch users again and how to delete a user. So listing the users I mentioned is this. I can see there. So if I want to change the context and go back to the Docker desktop user, kubectl config set context current user equals Docker desktop. Sweet. So if I wanted to remove access for the service account and undo all the things we just did, I would need that token name that we had again from before. And then there's a command where I can just delete. Let me go grab it. It's at the bottom of the tutorial, but I will just do it here so you see what it looks like. Oops, I don't want to yell it. System delete secret, and then token name. And then there we are. It is deleted, no longer have the access. So now we're going to go back where we actually are connected to the cluster in Linode. I'll show you here. And you can see that there's a couple things. There's a Helm deployment up there. So a couple secrets. And this will be torn down after, but so anything here is not going to be leaked. Don't worry. I just want to make sure I'm thorough and show you everything. So when you go through it, you know what to look for. We're going to go through that same process or a really similar process, change some of the nomenclature, how we name things a bit, and get this up and running in the actual cluster. Then we're going to add it to CI/CD. So a couple extra steps here that we're going to go ahead and do. So the first thing we're going to do is create the service account. Service account demo. And you can see we're in the deployment demo. We are on a kube service account branch here. So I'm actually probably not gonna end up merging this. So things will just live here in this branch. Perfect, the service account is created. Let's just check it out, make sure we have it. You can see that we do have it there. So the service account has been created. We see the YAML there. Then we're going to create the cluster role binding. So again, as we mentioned before, we're actually not going to be able to do this with the 1.22 with the command. So it would be the create cluster role binding. So I have a config file up here, and we're going to go ahead and apply that. So let me actually show you the config file. I'm going to change my share real quick. Okay, great. So we have the config file that we're going to be applying here. Really similar to what we just saw. Service account demo should have been the name of. Yeah, SA demo, perfect. We're going to use that. It's going to, the metadata is going to be CI Kubernetes service account. So that would be what we pass in as the cluster role binding name. It's cluster role binding with the V1 API. The role ref, so here's what it's able to do. It's going to be a cluster admin. These are the permissions we're giving it. Cluster role and then the subject. So it's for this a service account. SA demo, namespace default. We didn't do cube system here, so we're just going to have it be in the default namespace. And you can play around with namespaces all you want. Really, it's going to be for the full cluster. So once you kind of get into it, you can pick out what's best for you. But just to get up and running, I'm just going to keep it really simple here. So let's go ahead and apply that. These templates, and I have cluster role binding YAML here. Perfect, it's created. So again, CI Kubernetes SA, that is the data that was created. And then this would be the opportunity where, in the links, you're going to want to go into the service account also and go get those tokens. So that CA cert that I mentioned, and then the token, those are both going to be really important because we're going to base 64 those inside of the actual cluster. So now that we have this and the service account as an admin of the cluster, we're going to go to the CI/CD and update some things. So we're back here again. This is the former authentication mechanism. We're going to delete this, and we're going to add in a brand new, fresh command to get in. There we go. And this is going to be down here. This is using the kubectl command line. So we're actually going to want to move this up a bit to ahead of this. And don't need to run this because we don't need to keep config there. So that can be gone. And then we actually don't need JQ anymore. So we can get rid of this, I believe. That should be it. And what's happening here? So that token that I mentioned, you're going to set that as an Envar. Copy and paste exactly what's in the config file, pop it in, and then we're going to echo it out base64-d, so decode that token with base64, and that's going to be the decoded token that we're going to pass in here when we're setting the credentials. We're also going to do the CA cert. So we're going to echo the CA cert. So you need to also put that as an Envar. It's 2 Envars to add. Base64 decode, and that's going to get piped in and it's going to live in ca.cert. Then we're going to run pretty similar commands here. So kubectl config, we're setting the cluster that we want to be talking to. SA demo, that's the name of my cluster. Cert -- certificate authority, that's going to be the ca.cert that we have here. And then -- server, so server endpoint. Where you can get that is actually on Linode. There's a Kubernetes API endpoint. Every cloud provider is going to have it's going to be called something really similar. It could just be server endpoint, API endpoint, but really this is what you want to know, like how to interact with the Kubernetes cluster. So the main endpoint there, that's going to be something you have to know regardless of your cluster. That's how we know where we're sending this, which cluster we are configuring. So again, cluster name here. And then we're setting their credentials. So kubectl config set credentials for this cluster. And then we're using the tokens. So the decoded token from this step up here is going to be used down here. And then we're setting the context. So the context says who is operating, who's using this. So kubectl config, we're setting the context. The context we're going to name CCI, CircleCI. The user is going to be SA demo. That is the one we just created, that service account user. And then the cluster is also SA demo. I know that's confusing, probably slightly redundant. I might be a bit more descriptive if I was doing this for production here. And then we're saying we actually want to use the context that we set. So we're using the context CCI that's set up here. So it's going to be using SA demo to be talking to SA demo. So I'm going to go ahead and behind the scenes, I'm going to add those Envars. And then we're going to see if this works. Okay, so just to show behind the scenes, I went and added these tokens. So if I go to my environmental variables, I'll see the CA cert. One thing to note, a lot of times there's going to be a equal sign at the end. And if you double click to copy and paste, it probably won't pick those up. So make sure you have those. It's just a really weird phantom error. It just won't work. You're going to see the token here. And then you're going to see the server endpoint. So I have those here. It's 443 for Linode, but for other services, it might not have a port specified. So don't worry, yours just does not. If you're using AWS, for instance, it won't have a port specified. So let's go back in. Let's run that commit and then see if this thing works. Sending it out. And then we will follow along in the UI. And we have done it. You can see here we have the same process as before, upgrading the Helm chart, simple mechanisms, but then we're setting up the LKE config here with these pieces. So we're getting all set in, and we're actually doing it with the user SA demo. So I create the context, I switch to the right context, so all these commands are working. And then I have the external IP right here. We can make sure the beautiful website is still up, and there it is. So that's it. That is how you go about creating a service account, giving it the ClusterRoleBinding, the cluster admin access, and then implementing that and putting it in your CI/CD process. Again, a couple ways to go about it. You could also update the Linode token from that original example. Really up to you. Just want to give you the information and you make the decision. Thanks very much. I hope you learned a lot. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments.